asset quality or banks rather, and Ira's got some fantastic details and analysis on financial lenders and their asset quality. Ira.
Yeah, I think, guys, the story started exactly 2 years back. So it's been exactly 8 quarters since the bad loan cleanup. And, as I was thinking about this, I think this is the best analogy to describe this is just cleaning up a house that had been locked up for a very, very long time. So I'm going to start at the start of the 2 years and then come to where we are now. But it's like, you sort of, the AQR opened the door to a really dirty house that hadn't been cleaned in a while. So the regulators went in, started looking at bank balance sheets and started to say, okay, there's a lot of muck around here. So what do you do when you first open a dirty house? You clean the floors, right? That's the obvious place. That's where you can see all the dust. So that's where the cleanup started. You were at about 3.4 lakh crore in terms of gross NPAs of the listed banks. The cleanup started December 15 was a big quarter. March 16 was a big quarter. And these were the quarters in which the public sector banks, that was the obvious place where the dirt and the muck was there. The public sector banks were cleaning up their balance sheets. So you saw sharp rises in the reported gross NPAs of listed banks here on. Then you got around to the next financial year. So you got to the June quarter and the September quarter. Now, at this point in time, the public sector banks had already done a large part of their cleanup. You have to give them credit that they were sort of, out there up front when they were told to clean up, they did clean up. But then the regulators started to look at dust, which may be lying in other places, maybe some of the shells that weren't dusted out. And these are the private banks. And this is where you started to see the private bank NPAs come out. Some of them had actually delayed recognition in the hope perhaps that they could find some resolution before they had to recognize. But then, it wasn't playing out that way. So the private banks started to recognize their NPAs as well. And by the December 16 and actually March 17 quarter, you had gone to NPAs, that's gross NPAs, of 7.78 lakh crore. Now, what has happened since then is that the pace of the addition to gross NPAs has most certainly slowed down. This is the stuff that was, hiding behind the closets, the dirt hiding behind the closets. This is now coming out in the form of divergences, which the RBI is asking banks to recognize. So you've seen some banks like Axis Bank recognize their divergences. Others may not have done it yet. But what you have seen as a result is that at the September 17 point, which is exactly 8 quarters after the cleanup began, the increase in gross NPAs is actually the slowest that it has been over the past 8 quarters. So there's just about a 1.3% increase in the reported gross NPA of listed banks. This is the slowest that you have seen all the way down over these 8 quarters, which we are talking about here. Now, the question I guess we've all been asking is, when does this end? And again, when you look at that 8.4% number, 8.4 lakh crore number, you would be perhaps tempted to say maybe the cleanup is over. Maybe it is, but there are two risk points that I want to flag off. One is those divergences. We know that Axis had taken note of those divergences and marked them into NPA, but we know that ICICI Bank, SBI said that they haven't gotten the final note from RBI. So you may in the next couple of quarters see them mark some more accounts down into NPA. And then you had one-off large cases, RCOM being case in point, where banks have still invoked schemes like the SDR. We don't know how those schemes are going to go. So there's always the risk that if those schemes don't go the way they're expected to, some of that could get added into the NPA as well. But in terms of the reported numbers, guys, this is the slowest increase that you have seen in gross NPAs in the last 8 quarters for sure.
Hey, just one quick concern, Ira. I think while Axis and Yes reported divergences this quarter, the public sector banks, most of them said that their audits were still going on.
Yes,
right?
that's what I was saying.
Do we expect large numbers to come in, which might, in some sense, disrupt the sort of the trend we're trying to establish, which
Absolutely.
is that bad assets might be leveling off?
That's exactly what I was saying. What I was saying was that you will see perhaps in the December quarter or in the March quarter, SBI, ICICI in particular will be the large guys, because from what we understand, the accounts that Axis had to mark down are accounts that pretty much everybody, all the large corporate lenders had exposure to. So you may see that number go up again. And also, like I said, in case some of these SDRs, etc., don't work, some of them were invoked way back as well. Some of that, sort of those accounts may come into the NPA. So it's very tough to call a bottom to this. And remember, this is an evolving situation. Power, for instance, we had the Credit Suisse analyst here, Ashish Gupta, who said that in Power, a very low proportion of accounts, stressed accounts, have been marked into NPA. So that could be a risk factor. Telecom, we've already seen play out. So tough to call an end to it. But just in terms of the reported numbers, this is the slowest increase. I just have 2 caveats to put out there. The September 15 number numbers do not include IDFC Bank because they started trading as a bank in December 15. And in the last 2 quarters, which is March, June, and September, 3 quarters, we've taken the SBI consolidated numbers.
Yeah, and I just one more word of caution, which I think Ira has already flagged off by mentioning accounts like Arcom. But we'll also see in the next few days, won't we, what the decision is on the 30 additional or 30 additional accounts that RBI flagged off after the first 12.
Yeah.
And how many of them head to insolvency? And if they do head to insolvency, additional provisioning, etc.,
Provisioning
on those
for sure.
accounts.
Yes, so I haven't gone into the provisioning. Actually, the provisioning numbers this time around have been higher. But then you can look at it, positively saying that the cleanup is happening. But yes, provisions will continue to remain high.
My gosh, this should give the markets some relief.
But I just have one question, Ida, and which is that if we look at, instead of looking at it on a quarter-on-quarter or a half-yearly basis, if you look at what the trend has been, and let's use the term the trend from September 15 to September 17, in a 2-year period, the gross NPAs have doubled, right? Or more than doubled. Typically, cycles tend to plateau out at the top and then start falling off. I'm not asking you to time it, but is there a possibility that a lot of pain is in the system and 12 months, 18 months down the line, we may not have numbers as high as these?
Gosh, I have no idea.
No,
I really don't.
Just looking at the fact that a lot of troubled sectors have already been accounted for. Maybe 1 or 2 are left, but a lot of troubled sectors already accounted for in this period of the last 4 or 6 quarters.
For sure. So the pace of increase will probably slow. When will NPA start falling? That depends on the resolution process as well, right? How quickly the resolution process moves along. For NPAs to actually fall off, I'm not saying it won't happen. It has to happen at some point. If it doesn't happen, we are in a little bit of a trouble. I won't be able to guess on when that starts. Depends on the economy too, right? If economic growth picks up, some of the people who are at the bottom, just about stressed, will start to recover. But if the economy doesn't pick up, then that stress could turn into NPAs. It's very tough to tell that in a
I was purely coming from a perspective of how many of the stress sectors that were spoken about. I remember metals and telecom were the big talking points. 12 months, telecom probably still remains, but a lot of those have been accounted for as
Only
well.
metals has started to improve. Power has everything has been accounted for. Only metals has improved. Telecom hasn't improved. Power hasn't improved in terms of the big stress points.
And I think we should still wait. For instance, I think exporters are still weeping about, the GST-led disruptions outside of the anyways declining trend of exports we've seen over the past few months. So I would agree with Ira that, nobody's going to put their neck out at this point in time and say, hey, look, we're stabilizing and from here on we can only decrease. There's so many elements in the economy that show such structural weakness at this point in time as well. So. All right, but nonetheless, that said, it does seem like we might be leveling off.